Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a conversation, right? 50 minutes long between two, well, very significant global figures,
Mm.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and former U.S. President Donald Trump.
And this call happened right when tensions were really boiling over in the Middle East. Plus, the conflict in Ukraine still a daily reality. It's a fascinating snapshot.
Definitely. High-level diplomatic interaction at a really critical moment.
Absolutely. And the specific sources we're diving into today give us a window directly into that conversation, or at least, how it was reported by one side.
Right. The call was apparently set for Trump's 79th birthday, but the source material makes it pretty clear. The bulk of the discussion quickly turned to these major international, well, flashpoints.
Exactly.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We're taking the source material you've provided, primarily reports from Kremlin foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov, who briefed on the call. And we're going to try and extract the most important nuggets.
What was actually discussed regarding the escalating Iran-Israel situation? What about the Ukraine conflict? According to this briefing, anyway.
Yeah, and what different perspectives were shared, again, based on this specific reporting.
Think of it as navigating the reported details of this one diplomatic event. We're using the source briefing, Ushakov's account, as our guide to understand the points raised.
All right, let's jump in then. The sources emphasize that a major part of this call was dedicated to the unfolding crisis in the Middle East.
That's right.
And to really grasp the conversation, we kind of need to understand the dramatic backdrop described in the source material leading up to the call.
Yeah, that context is crucial. The briefing details a pretty significant escalation just before this phone call took place. On June 13th, Israeli forces conducted a series of strikes. They reportedly codenamed it Operation Rising Lion.
But these weren't just symbolic actions, were they? According to the sources, the targets were specific.
Very specific. Iranian nuclear facilities and military sites. That's what the briefing says.
Wow.
And the impact, as reported, was severe. The source material mentions the death of several high-ranking Iranian military officers in these strikes. It specifically includes the IRGC commander, Hossein Salami.
Hossein Salami. And the IRGC is Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? And a major force.
Exactly. So losing a commander like Salami, yeah, that would be significant. It explains why that name pops up in the report.
Okay, got it. And Iran's response, according to the sources, was equally dramatic. Operation True Promise III, it was called.
It was. The briefing stated Iran launched over 150 ballistic missiles and more than 100 drones, all towards Israeli targets. That's a massive and direct military action.
Huge. And the sources point out the gravity of this exchange, don't they? Noting it seems to mark a shift.
Yeah, a shift from what's mostly been decades of proxy warfare, states backing other groups to fight,
Right.
to this kind of direct military confrontation between Iran and Israel. That shift, reported right before the call, sets a very, very tense stage.
It certainly does. So how did this acute crisis play out in the discussion between Putin and Trump, according to Ushakov's briefing, that is?
Well, let's start with Putin's reported perspective on these events.
Okay.
Ushakov's account states that Putin condemned the Israeli military operations against Iran. Straight up condemned them. He expressed serious concern about potential further escalation, specifically warning of unpredictable consequences for the entire situation in the Middle East. That's the quote used.
Strong words. Did it mention anything else from Putin's side?
Yeah, the briefing also mentioned that Putin informed Trump about his recent talks with leaders from both Iran and Israel.
Ah, so positioning himself as someone in contact with both sides.
Seems like it. And the source material says Putin reiterated Russia's proposal for finding mutually acceptable solutions regarding the Iranian nuclear program. His account emphasized Moscow's readiness to mediate between the parties.
Offering mediation right in the middle of a direct confrontation. That's noteworthy.
It is.
What about Trump's view then? As described by Ushakov, of course. Was it similar? All about concern.
Well, Ushakov's briefing indicated Trump described the situation in the region as very disturbing. So yes, concern there.
Okay.
However, and this is interesting, the same briefing also reported that Trump acknowledged the effectiveness of the Israeli attacks on Iranian targets.
Ah. Okay, that's a fascinating contrast reported there. He sees it as disturbing, yet also notes the effectiveness of the strikes that, well, caused the disturbance.
Exactly. It suggests a maybe slightly different emphasis than Putin's reported condemnation.
Yeah, different framing, perhaps.
It's one of those details in the source material that makes you pause, and consider the reported difference.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Did the sources mention anything else on this? Maybe a diplomatic angle?
Yes, specifically regarding the Iranian nuclear program, even with this military escalation happening.
Right, right. There was talk about resuming nuclear talks.
According to Ushakov's account, yeah, the leaders did not rule out the possibility of resuming negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. And what's particularly specific, as reported, is that Trump apparently told Putin that a U.S. negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is ready to resume talks with the Iranian foreign minister.
Steve Witkoff.
Yeah.
That's very specific detail to come out of the briefing, isn't it?
It is. It feels quite concrete compared to just vaguely saying nuclear talks were mentioned.
Yeah.
Its inclusion in the reported summary could imply, maybe, that this wasn't just a general idea, perhaps linked to a known channel or individual, at least from Trump's reported perspective in the call. It adds a layer of reported detail.
A layer suggesting potential diplomacy happening at the same time as, or maybe even because of, the military actions.
Possibly. It's complex.
Okay, so let's try and bring this part together for you, the listener, based strictly on the source material we have. The sources highlight this dramatic military context. Iran and Israel trading direct strikes, big escalation.
Then they show us these two different reported reactions in the call from Putin and Trump. One reportedly condemning the Israeli action, the other acknowledging its effectiveness, even while both express concern.
Right. And critically, amidst this reported direct conflict, the sources mention that specific detail about potential resumed nuclear talks, even naming a potential negotiator, Steve Witkoff.
It reveals, through the lens of this particular briefing, how major global crises are being viewed and discussed at the highest levels. It shows different priorities and maybe a potential window, or at least a discussion about a potential window for diplomacy, even as things escalate militarily.
It really underscores the complexity, doesn't it? Okay, let's shift gears now. From the Middle East to the second major topic that reportedly came up, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
Yeah, this was also a significant chunk of the reported 50-minute discussion, according to Ushakov's briefing.
So what did Putin reportedly share with Trump about the situation in Ukraine?
Well, Ushakov's account indicated that Putin updated Trump on ongoing prisoner exchanges between Russian and Ukrainian forces.
Prisoner exchanges. Okay.
And the source material is quite specific here. It mentions the types of prisoners being exchanged. Quote, seriously wounded and prisoners of war below 25 years of age.
Wow, that level of detail is striking. The specific criteria, seriously wounded, younger soldiers, it points to a very particular, maybe humanitarian-focused aspect being discussed at this level.
It does add a specific kind of human element to the broader conflict discussion reported in the briefing. Now, what about Trump's reported position? His interest regarding the Ukraine conflict during this call.
According to Ushakov, Trump marked his interest in a quick end to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Pretty clear desire for a swift resolution there.
A straightforward position, as reported anyway. And how did Putin reportedly respond to that? Or just to the general idea of negotiations?
Ushakov's briefing states that Putin expressed readiness to continue negotiations with Ukraine after June 22nd.
Setting a specific date, even if it was, very near future relative to when the call happened.
Yes. That specificity, after June 22nd, as reported in the source, is another one of those concrete details. It suggests a reported timeline, maybe a condition from Putin's side, regarding when formal talks might resume, according to this briefing.
Exactly. It gives us a reported point of reference for future possibilities. Again, strictly from the details shared about this call.
So looking at this part of the conversation through the source material for you, the listener, what do these details tell us? The sources highlight specific ongoing humanitarian actions. These prisoner exchanges focused on particular groups.
And they outline the reported positions on potential future negotiations, Trump expressing interest in a quick end, and Putin stating readiness to talk, but after a specific date.
Right. It provides a reported snapshot, doesn't it, of the diplomatic landscape regarding Ukraine from this particular interaction.
Yeah, indicating that even amidst the ongoing conflict, specific exchanges are happening, and potential future negotiation points, potential timelines are being discussed, as presented in this source material anyway.
Okay, so bringing the two major topics together. The source material makes it clear that while they're distinct crises, the escalating Middle East situation and the ongoing Ukraine conflict were both central to this single 50-minute phone call.
Indeed. Ushakov reportedly characterized the overall conversation between Trump and Putin as significant and very useful. It appears from this briefing that this one call touched directly upon two of the most, well, volatile flashpoints in current global affairs.
So just to recap the key takeaways we've extracted for you directly from the source material about this conversation. On the Middle East, we saw the reported dramatic context, direct strikes between Iran and Israel.
Then the differing reported reactions, Putin's condemnation, Trump acknowledging effectiveness, alongside shared concern.
And that mention of potential renewed nuclear talks, complete with the specific detail about Steve Witkoff.
And then on the Ukraine front, the sources detailed the reported discussion around ongoing specific prisoner exchanges involving the seriously wounded and younger soldiers.
And the reported positions on future talks. Trump's interest in a quick end, and Putin's stated readiness to continue talks after June 22nd.
All these points, these specific details, come directly from the briefing on this one conversation, offering a unique, although, admittedly one-sided, look at these high-level discussions.
It really highlights the granular level of detail sometimes available even from just summaries of these calls.
It does.
So based only on the source material we've explored today, here's a final thought for you to maybe mull over. The sources describe this major escalation, direct military conflict between Iran and Israel. Pretty serious stuff. Yet, within the same reported conversation, they mention the potential for renewed diplomatic talks on the nuclear program, even naming a negotiator. What does this juxtaposition, as presented to the sources, suggest about how major international crises are perceived and may be managed at this level?
Or you could consider the reported details on Ukraine. That specific focus on prisoner exchanges, the seriously wounded, the under 25s, combined with Putin's reported mention of a specific date, June 22nd, for potential negotiation resumption, how might these particular details, coming out of this single source, offer clues about the immediate future dynamics of that conflict, according to the perspective captured in the specific briefing, of course?
Yeah, think about those specific pieces of information, the exact points reportedly raised in this call, and what they might imply about the state of play in both regions purely through the lens of this source. It's quite a bit to chew on.
It definitely offers a specific angle on these complex situations, drawn entirely from the reported details of this one conversation.